So, welcome everybody to this version of IP Shorts, Exalt IP. This is John Pryor here, and today I've got the absolute pleasure of being joined and being able to interview Shireen Smith. Shireen Smith of many books, in fact, but the most recent one, which was launched on my birthday, hence it caught my attention, is called Brand Tuned. And Shireen is a lawyer. Specializing in the legal aspects of branding, and it's a really fascinating area, as we're going to discover through the course of this meeting. She's a graduate of London University, Queen Mary's University of London, with a master's degree in intellectual property. And most importantly, she's run her own specialist IP law firm since 2005, and that's called As Rights. She's also a trained marketer and brand manager, and hence she has incredible insights into the intersect between branding and intellectual property. And she offers branding consultancy through her business Brand Tuned. And as I've described already, her latest book, Brand Tuned, is the new rules of branding, strategy, and intellectual property. It's a really good starting point on how to develop a brand. And Shireen also, surprisingly, is across many different social media sites. She's got her own podcast called Brand Tuned. And she also has Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So Shireen, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much, John, for having me and for that wonderful intro.
You're more than welcome. So let's jump straight into it, because I'm fascinated, because as we discussed previously, I don't think many people are explaining why branding is so important to intellectual property and vice versa. And you have incredible wealth of expertise to bring to this area. And so could you explain to me first just why I think I've probably explained why, but why you found this area interesting, why you focused on it, and why, in your view, you need a brand for success?
Right. Well, I've focused on this area because I noticed that a lot of business owners and agencies that advise them on branding don't take account of IP. They're not really fully conversant with IP, and yet IP impacts the decisions they're making. So I decided to write the book Brand Tuned to understand what's going on and to be able to explain how IP actually fits into the branding process. So a brand really is, I think the starting point is to look at what we mean by brand, because it's quite a nebulous word. A lot of people think it means a logo and a color palette, but it's a lot bigger than that. You know, your brand is the associations people have in their mind about your business. So we all have a brand, whether we actively think of our business as a brand or not. Brand encompasses our entire identity, culture, values, what we stand for, how we deliver whatever we sell, etc. So brand may not be so relevant if you're just creating something very short term. If, however, you want an enduring long-term business, then brand matters hugely. It's worth thinking about your business as a brand and what associations you want people to have about you, so you can deliver an experience that reinforces those associations. It gives you a roadmap, so everyone in your organization understands what's expected of them. So if you think of brands you know well, such as Apple or Samsonite or Dyson, these are all associated with good design and user friendliness. So for these brands to have become associated in our minds with good design involved a decision that design was a top value of theirs. They will have built every aspect of their products and services to achieve good design. So once a brand is known, it then becomes a safe choice for consumers because they know what to expect. As for IP, it has everything to do with the brand identifiers, such as the name and symbols that enables people to recognize the brand and not confuse it with another.
Brilliant, and some fantastic brands there. But of course, you deal with a range of different businesses, from small to medium to very large as well. And in your book, you've described the new rules of branding, strategy, and intellectual property coming together. But in order to create an effective brand, you've got to consider brand protection at the earliest stage of creating the brand. And in your book, of course, the T stands for think of IP first.
Yeah.
So could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, certainly, John. It's quite common for branding agencies not to involve lawyers during branding, even though the decisions they make involve IP law. Instead, they create the brand and relegate lawyers to simply checking whether a name they've already chosen is available to use and register. So the recent case of Oatley and Glebe Farm provides an example of why this approach is too narrow. So if you're just focusing on how to get name recognition, you're likely to want to use generic industry terms so people immediately recognize what you're all about. However, the problem with that approach is that you overlook the brand protection and wider implications of the choice. You see, the law is not going to give someone a monopoly over a generic term that traders need to use to operate their businesses. Oatley discovered this when they objected to a competitor using the name Pure OT. Now, even though Oatley is a well-known, famous mark and as such has greater protection than lesser-known brands, it failed to stop Glebe Farms using the term Pure OT as the name of their milk. It lost because OT is a generic term, so the competitor was entirely within its rights to use the word OT, even though it is similar to Oatley. The only reason Oatley was able to trademark the name was by adding the L in the generic term, but that didn't thereby give them a monopoly over the term OT. So this highlights the serious drawback of creating one's main company name around a generic element. If companies could look ahead at the challenges of protecting a name like Oatley, they might make better choices of name. You know, a name like Hellmann's Mayonnaise is the opposite of generic. It's a highly distinctive name. So if a competitor used a name like Pure Hellmann's, consumers would agree that the competitor was taking unfair advantage of Hellmann's. But if your company is built around a descriptive term like Oatley's is, you're very likely to be called a bully if you try to defend your turf. So the case was a PR disaster for Oatley. And I think if they'd considered brand protection at the very start, they'd have picked a better name. So
this is really interesting and really important, of course, because at that stage, I don't know how old they are, Oatley, but they've been in business for a while. There's a reputational aspect to that, isn't there, Shireen?
right.
You know, in terms
Can't
of
just change names.
and exactly, and being seen to possibly be a little bit picky with other competitors in the marketplace. It doesn't do your business, doesn't serve your business well necessarily. So, anything else about the law and how the law relates to branding and brand names that you think is important to share?
Yeah, names involve key IP considerations, as do choices of other identifiers like symbols, taglines, strap lines, music, characters, and so on. So you need to consider ownership whenever these are being created for your brand. Do you have the right agreement with the agency creating the brand identifiers for you? Do you have the rights you need over music you'll be using, for example? The second aspect of it is, what do you need to do to secure trademark protection of brand identifiers you're using, such as color, say? When businesses go into administration, the assets that often attracts the greatest value are the trademarks of the name, logo, and other identifiers of the brands. That's where, you know, all the value lies. So there are just so many subtleties around names that catch people out. For example, when Tesco chose the name Clubcard for its innovative loyalty program, loyalty programs were a new phenomenon. So Tesco spent £1 million making the idea of loyalty programs famous. But because the name they chose, Clubcard, isn't a name they could trademark, they couldn't stop every other retailer and supermarket also introducing loyalty programs, which they could call Clubcard. So they were able to benefit from the recognition of loyalty programs that Tesco had generated. If they'd chosen a name which they could have owned as a trademark, they could have stopped other retailers from benefiting from the name that loyalty programs had acquired thanks to Tesco, and therefore could have been more unique in what they introduced until other people were able to sort of catch up, if you like, with their loyalty programs. Yeah.
That's a really interesting bit of history. Yeah, and I realised they were one of the first into that loyalty game in the supermarket area, but they missed a trick with their naming.
For sure, yes. And that, so, you know, names are so important.
So as part of your research in this whole area, Shireen, you've identified that actually branding professionals receive very little training in intellectual property. Now, I'm of course filling in some gaps, and you haven't said this, but is that a little bit like a tree surgeon not knowing anything about trees or the garden, or even worse, a surgeon not knowing anything about medicine? That's probably pushing it too far. But the branding professionals not knowing about IP is an issue, isn't it?
It's a huge issue, yes, because they're creating IP in the actions they take. So brand managers and marketers are the closest to a brand and need to understand that when there are IP implications to their actions. So a case that illustrates this is Lacoste and Crocodile. These two are often locked in dispute over their crocodile logos, trying to be the first to register a crocodile. So Crocodile International noticed that Lacoste wasn't making consistent use of the crocodile symbol that they'd registered in New Zealand. So the crocodile design they were using was different to the version they'd registered. This presented an opportunity for Crocodile International to apply to cancel Lacoste's trademark registration for non-use and secure trademark protection of their own crocodile. In its defense, Lacoste argued that it should not lose its trademark for lack of use because while they weren't using the crocodile logo in the form it was registered, they were using the trademark because they were using different versions of crocodiles, and therefore it was still using a crocodile as its trademark. But the court rejected this broad argument that any use of a crocodile is use of their registered crocodile trademark. The court said no, claiming a monopoly over the concept of a crocodile was just too broad. But the interesting point to note is that Crocodile International would not have been able to register its crocodile design as a trademark in New Zealand if Lacoste's trademark hadn't been cancelled. So effectively, Lacoste would have got the wide scope of protection it was arguing it had by virtue its use of a logo of a crocodile in its branding if it had maintained an up-to-date trademark registration. So you see, if the marketing department tweaks the visual identity and doesn't tell the lawyers because they don't realize there's implications to their actions, it really exposes the company's valuable assets. So how can the lawyers advise and take steps to ensure the registrations are updated. It's absolutely vital for brand managers to be educated in IP. Really,
and you'll excuse the pun, but it's a very costly mistake for someone to make there. I mean, that must have cost hundreds of thousands, if not more, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, the dispute, and yeah, it's not desirable at all.
So, fantastic. And my final question today is around about the fact that we are all online.
Sure.
More so than ever due to the COVID restrictions, etc. But therefore, brands are more than ever fully represented online, their digital form, across a range of different media, including social media, of course. So how do you manage your brand and your reputation now, encompassing the whole digital ecosystem?
Yeah, well, obviously you should use your brand identifiers in a consistent way in accordance with your registrations, so you gain recognition in a way that's consistent with your trademarks. But once you've established your brand and you're off the ground, it's really important to manage the brand by having an annual review to reset your brand strategy and see how is it performing, what associations do people have with the brand, are there any negative connotations, are there any challenges the business is facing, and so on. You then set objectives for the year ahead as part of your brand strategy, and it's essentially part of your marketing plan and how you're going to promote the brand in the year ahead. Then at the end of that year, the business needs to consider how it did. Did they meet their objectives? What went well? What didn't go well? And so on. So by having this close eye on the brand and the associations people have to it, you'll be well placed to manage the reputation and know how to respond really to any eventuality.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So Shireen, it befalls me to say thank you ever so much for joining us today, and to everybody who would like to stay in touch or get in touch with Shireen, there will be her contact coordinates in the associated media. But the book is brand tuned, and I think but the best way of summarising today's call, if I may, is to say that the tuned is an acronym. T stands for Think IP First. That's U is understand the market. N is name it right. Then E is establish the brand, and D is drive the brand. So brand tuned. There it is for everybody. Thank you very much, Shireen. It's been an absolute pleasure, and let's stay in touch. Goodbye now.
Thank you very much, John.